just want to die.
What does it take for an album to nearly kill an artist's love for making music? This is the Glasshouse's 2024 album 867 is just that. You can just tell that it's built on raw emotion, passion, and just so much creativity. As Radio Tintin is stationed in Montreal, we've been able to get a video interview with the mind behind it all, who's in Victoria, British Columbia.
Hi, I'm Zeke Dukart. I'm in a band called This Is The Glasshouse, and you're listening to Radio Tintin.
867 is an incredibly special album. Personally, I just haven't been able to stay away from this album for more than a couple days, even though it came out almost half a year ago. Every single song of this album from start to finish somehow takes you through a journey that I've rarely experienced through music. But the uniqueness and the sheer quality of this project just didn't happen by chance, as the making of it took an incredible toll on Zeke.
Writing lyrics and writing parts and figuring out how songs were going to go, that was done in a healthy way. That took a long time, like a really long time. And then it was just recording stuff and like properly, and mixing was just stuff that I just kept putting off and off and off and off. And that was the process that was genuinely like some of the worst time of my adult life.
And the struggle that Zeke went through is explained by how much of this album Zeke made completely by himself. While there were several tracks where he worked heavily with Edmontonian Kolbachynski, the majority of the writing, composing, mixing, and recording of this album was done entirely by Zeke.
Those odd-numbered tracks were almost completely written and transcribed with MIDI, and then made into sheet music, and then giving that sheet music to my friends and them recording it more or less exactly how I wanted. On this record, and anything I make, there is a story and a decision, and that is kind of why this took up a year and a half of my life, like constantly thinking about it, and just because I had to make like tens of thousands of little decisions, some very small, like instant in my brain, and some like really took a while, a couple days, and there's always a story behind it. So cool.
The culmination of those 10,000 decisions is what makes this album just so incredible. While you could cheat yourself through a school essay, you just cannot bypass the amount of work that goes into an album of this quality. And this quality is evident in how Zeke takes so many different elements that are so chaotic and somehow finds a way to bind them cohesively together in just the best ways. A great example of this is this part from the song 867, which I just love. But now let's talk about two standouts of this record, one of which was particularly inspired by McGill University. We'll get into that in a sec, but first let's showcase the album's opening track, Streetlight by Streetlight. Growing up in Whitehorse, Zeke found himself inspired by two taxidermied moose on a store rooftop.
I drove past my mom. I remember just driving past those like every week, like almost every day. Every time I'm in town, it's 2nd Avenue. It's the most busy street in Whitehorse. Like, you're gonna drive past it, and just looking at those things for my entire life just kind of started formulating a story about the perspective of one of the two moose that are, if you see, are like kind of locked. They're like budding antlers, and yeah, it was just a story totally derived from the perspective of one of these frozen entities that have been the exact same way for like 50 years. Even though it's lyrically, it's a bit of a black sheep. Instrumentally, I was like, this is really good. And this was a lot of fun to do.
The second song is Southpaw, which Zeke got a helping hand in making by Radio Tintin's home base, McGill.
I don't think I've said this in public before, but some guy who is doing his master's or PhD, I don't remember, at McGill University, and he what his thing was spatial audio, like, which is audio with a ton of speakers around you. Not like, and he was talking about like 22 speaker surround audio, and it was pretty technical, so I was kind of checked out. But he was playing examples, and in the studio there we had like 6, so we could kind of use those to approximate it, and it was cool. And I remember I asked him just a question about, very politely, about, so this is really cool. Like, what's like the practical use of this? And his answer, I know he didn't mean it, but it came off to everyone as like extremely defensive. Like he'd been asked that dozens of times before. Like, I don't really care. And it's just like kind of something like that. And it was funny. And so we never forgot that. And then he played one example of a song of a couple music profs at McGill, just shit, like jamming with being recorded by all these microphones, and I was like, this bass line was just from a jam, man. I love this bass line, and it was very close to the bass line of Southpaw, and then the entire meeting was being recorded, and then he specifically said, I hadn't said anything, he said, oh yeah, you guys are gonna have to scrub that one because it's like a work in progress composition from a professor. And like, which I mean, I know a lot of music profs, they like compose, they never release anything. I was never going to hear it ever again. So I remember I just had those 8 notes in my head. Dun, 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 and just, I left the room instantly, went to a practice room and started playing it on the piano on a voice memo. I still have the voice memo. And then that was the inspiration for the entire composition of that song. But lyrically, the song is about my dad, who's such a funny guy, such an interesting guy. He's a weird guy. And, he's a very emotive person. And he's left-handed, which is where the song name comes from. And it was just reflecting on feelings that I had about him getting older, and the ways that he kind of mistreats his body in some ways, and I just, he's getting old.
I started saving all the notes you left for me when I slept in, and I've been taking more pictures of you before the flicker again.
And that was extremely personal. That was a very real song, and it's not a very long song, and it's not very lyrically dense. I had a lot of things to pack into a few words of how I was feeling, and it was super nice to put something that was, again, so lyrically important and personal, probably one of the most personal songs I've ever written, onto an instrumentation that was very quaint, but like you said, did build up to this eventual 4-part tenor sax, close harmony with muted trumpet solo at the end, which is this explosion of contradistortion. It was a really nice output that happened to end up on the track.
867 is an incredible project, and was a result of a lot of trial and error from Zeke.
It was kind of like the progression was making music and then trying to make music you would listen to myself, and then finally, I feel like with this record, it's the first time where at the end of it, it was like, I've successfully made my own favorite music.
And I really do believe that This Is The Glasshouse has the potential to be a lot of people's favorite music, whether it be with 867 or any of its future projects. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. A special thank you to Esther, my co-producer, and to This Is The Glasshouse and everyone involved in the making of 867. We'll leave all the links below, and make sure to subscribe, as we'll be back very soon with another episode of Radio Tintin.